This session at noon. And the title, is it up there? Teaching the Ecology of Way of Life approach. There are many members in this group, so I'm going to leave it to them to introduce themselves and get us started. Is now good? Turn it over to you.
Yeah, hi, thank you everybody for coming to this thing today. So we've got a plan of action and it's going to be really tight with our schedule. So we've got a 30-minute workshop, then we have 5-minute lightning rounds, 4 of those, and then a kind of open conversation. So that's when you start seeing crazy 5-minute lightning round things happening, it's planned. You're fine. Okay? So without further ado, here is Caleb Cohoe and Phil Schoenberg, and they're going to get the workshop going.
Hey, so it wouldn't be fitting for us to get through a workshop on the ecology without having to defend our ways of life. So that's the exercise we're going to start with now. Divide you into groups where you'll each be looking at a different characteristic that probably most of us share, either as someone thinking about philosophy, scholars of philosophy, academics in general, teachers of philosophy. And the question is, what would the charges be that you would face from your colleagues, from the public, from legislators? You know, these are real things that happen. So we're going to divide you into groups. You'll have about 2 minutes to agree on a set of charges, and then each group, half the group will be on the defense, half will be in the prosecution. You'll have a few more minutes for that, and then we'll present and vote and see who's guilty. So I think we'll do this by where people are right now. I'm trying to guesstimate how many. So starting here back to here, you do teachers of philosophy. What would they be accused of? And then scholars of philosophy will start here, and we'll go back to the two of you. And then the remaining group is academics in general. What are they plausibly accused of?
Yeah. So,
Getting them to sign the charge sheet. And then the prosecution is they collect charge. It sounded like So what we're going to do is rehash what was already said, but they're divided into groups. The prosecution needs to come up with a charge. You need to write the charge. You need to come up with a charge. The first presentation will be reading the charge. And then follow up. I have no idea. No, I think you're working So, two groups. The prosecution just write out the prosecution. And first round will be reading the charge.
that's right, scholars.
Yeah. You're writing your charge.
Yeah.
This is what my dad would insult me. My dad was like, so you're on the that is a problem to hear. Okay.
Well, first thing.
And then, if you want to go through,
Gotta go.
Oh, and we're arrogant. We think that what we do makes us important.
That's good. There is this really good. But it's like this detachment.
Yeah.
So I think you're better than me. Like if you think about these things.
1 minute, everyone.
The taxpayer money, does that only work if like we're actually charging
Everybody's donors want to
We'll never off your public.
That's good, that's 3. So you got your charges now, split now.
I was actually going I couldn't make sense of that.
30 seconds, everyone. Try to articulate your application.
Yeah, so at this
Everybody gets 1 more minute.
So just agree on what the charges are going to be, and then.
That's what society says.
I think that would help us out.
When this is ready, have someone come to me so we can type your application.
You're also
So how do we do that? New jobs.
Well,
Give us something to try.
Okay, one question. We've got the, do you yours split, right? Yeah. So you got, one of those, trying to charge this, you're also going to propose. So one last thing, if you are found guilty. The proposal on and the prosecution. Or if you're feeling like self-chastisement.
fortunately, we are calling on the
What's the other thing?
No, the prosecution, just the prosecution. Yeah. I mean, you're responding.
Yeah.
And I thought, no, but you agreed on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you each get your vote. Okay, then you have prosecution and defense.
Oh no.
Then the last one is that both the prosecution and defense will also have to impose penalties.
Oh, you're gonna get
Oh, so maybe a penalty first before the
well, as part of each presentation, we're going to prosecution and plus penalties and defense plus penalties. Okay,
Okay, someone's
okay, 1 minute. 1 minute till we'll start assessing these charges.
Oh, is that no
Yeah.
No practical use.
Is that one charge? It's like, is that?
And your punishment? You can see the anything in
You'll be voting twice on the other 2 charges, not on your own charges. Yeah, they're all, we're about ready to go. A lot of it.
Okay, I'm going to start the timer again. Do you guys
Ross to come in and do a call for
what you're saying is that
some of them are, some of them have to be.
how much time
You
can
ready over here?
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna start presenting.
Oh, they haven't done it.
No, we're good, we're fine.
Okay. Okay. Time to hear the defense and the prosecution and vote on the charges. So we'll start over here with the charges against the academics. Would the prosecution come forward and present the charges?
All right, so we said that academics are a parasitic drain on society. They are abdicating responsibility and have biased views and censor conservative views. And so as their punishment, they should be imprisoned in
With no food.
All right.
So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And the defense?
Are you for the defense? Oh, okay, I can speak for the defense. Okay, so, our defense to being a parasitic drain on society is that although it's not always obvious, we are in fact centers of innovation and new methods of social coordination and production. For instance, creating the technology that you see here. And the social form of organization that we all happily live under and are concerned about. Abdicating responsibility for the results of our actions. Certainly for some individuals that's true, but on the whole, I think that's not. We've seen universities very deliberately and explicitly take on challenges and try to do it both at individual and institutional level in terms of not only democratic governance, but public health, educational excellence, and promoting a responsible citizenry generally. Biased, against the charge of being biased and censoring conservative views. As every member of the Academy knows, everyone has biases. The point of the exercise is to reveal what biases you have and to become self-conscious and aware of them. And so, guilty, but join the human race. And against the charge of censoring conservative views, certainly there has been that, and that happens. That again is a human thing. People don't like to hear stuff that they disagree with. I think though that the nature of academic inquiry and discipline is precisely to commit ourselves to hearing alternative views, to hearing the people who disagree with us and take them seriously. And insofar as we don't do that, we are failing at our disciplines. And so the punishment that if we are found guilty, we think we should do is to have institutions send their faculty out into the wild, to visit to spend time with just plain folks for a month and try to find out what they're actually interested in and try to articulate the value of our work to them.
Thank you.
Don't clap because you have to vote now.
Yeah. All right.
So which one, if you're gonna vote, for this one, is it black or white?
So it is black if for the prosecution. If you find academics guilty of the charges and want them imprisoned in an ivory tower. Black, white if you find them innocent. The group that just presented will not be voting. Everyone who's not in that group will be voting. Marissa is going to take the urn of truth around. Place one and only one of those two tokens in.
Oh wait, but it's only one.
No, everyone. Yeah. And we'll be having the prosecution of the scholars of philosophy next. So if you want to, you can get your votes in and then come up to make the charges. And we'll announce. Marissa will truthfully look at the votes, and then we'll see. And then we'll find out after the next presentation what the fate of academics will be. Okay. So can the prosecution for the scholars of philosophy come forward?
Okay.
We're sending representatives.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are accusing scholars of a few things. Uselessness is the main charge, but two types of uselessness. One is the problems that scholars are working on aren't applicable to anything in the real world, and the problems that they are working on, they're not making any progress in solving them anyway. We're still working on the same problems for the last 2 millennia, so even the useless things we're working on, we're not making progress. And then the second thing is drain on resources. So the punishment.
Community service and back pay for the drain on the resources. And in addition to making no real progress here with respect to any particular problems, there doesn't even seem to be clear consensus with respect to what the problems are that these people are working on. And so any hope of progress seems entirely lost.
Thank you. All right, the defense.
All right, I guess I'm defending for it. We utterly concede to the charges. And our proposed punishment is that we all get sort of put together in these large institutions to keep the rest of society safe from it. And we're going to call these institutions, I don't know, universities. And we're good with that.
Defense rests.
On draining resources. On draining resources. We would waste more resources if we were out there doing other things. Yeah, concentrate the drain and minimize it. Now we rest.
All right. So, again, the urn of truth is going around.
They're guilty, black, innocent.
Yeah, guilty, black, community service and back pay, innocent, focus the drain, white. And again, the scholars group won't vote, but everyone else should put their vote in. And in the meantime, I can report that the urn of truth has found academics innocent by a vote of 14 to 6. We'll see how scholars of philosophy fare. And now do we have the prosecution for teachers of philosophy ready to press charges?
Well, should we first say what the...
Yeah, we'll explain the charges and the penalty.
Okay, so the charge, should I say that? We charge philosophy teachers with wasting the time of students and being of no practical use. And we suggest the punishment be that they be forced to stay in a room and listen to someone drone on about nonsense.
Okay.
That's
neat.
So, our defense is that productivity is a capitalist construct meant to numb the masses, and that philosophy teachers are the only people that can give us the critical distance in order to see just how massively evil our capitalist overlords truly are. And so our punishment, I don't know if we can, our punishment is that we should not be on committees and we should have more faculty lines.
Okay. Yep. So again, the urn of truth is going around for the charges against teachers of philosophy. But I must report first that scholars of philosophy have been found guilty. By a vote of 10 to 5.
What was the vote, Caleb?
10 guilty votes, 5 innocent. So 2-to-1 margin.
I mean, in fairness, you
There
guys-
is a lot of back pay.
Well, we need the penalty phase.
Well, okay, so if we had time, and the way I did it in class, there would be 2 votes.
Yeah.
For the sake of time, we're not going to vote on community service and back pay versus the great penalty.
Focus the drain.
Yeah.
No, constrain the drain.
Put that on the baseball cap.
So let me say, while Marissa's counting up the final votes, so I just did a version of this exercise in my Ancient Art of Living class yesterday. So the idea was to pick categories that the students all fit into, because you're not trying to, it's easy to make charges against other people's ways of life, but to try to examine your own. So this was an honors class, so one of the groups was making charges against students in the honors program at MSU Denver. What would the other students say to them? And actually, the charge was they get too many resources, they get special treatment, it's unfair, it's perpetuating bias and inequality. And then also the charge against people who take a class in how to live. Who doesn't know that? We're gonna have pass around a handout on how you might do this exercise in class, but the way we were doing it pedagogically was to focus in on what are some of the characteristics the people in your class share as students at this institution or in a particular program or as students of this particular class, and get them to reflect on what their parents, their coworkers, their fellow students might find objectionable, and whether they can really articulate for themselves this way of life. And I think it would be natural to do after the apology, so I would see this more as once they get an idea of what Socrates is doing and what that kind of defense looks like. Now, let's see what level of metacognition they've reached, and can they defend themselves. Teachers of philosophy, we're much better than scholars. 16 votes for innocent and 3 for guilty. So you can teach philosophy, just don't write about it.
Question, is there a sense in which you might want to say that the goal would be to be able to be found guilty of living a philosopher's life? So the innocent actually might be you're not doing it well enough.
Yeah, that's really good. And obviously that's a question for what? Socrates doesn't seem to be maximizing his chances of acquittal. And that's actually going to get into, well, another approach to the apology that we're going to go on into, which is taking the charges and maybe accepting them or responding to them. And we did have, I mean, that's why the scholars lost, because they did happily accept the charges of their uselessness, and they're looking forward to their community service. So, all right. Yeah. Do we have time for reflection? Okay, we got a couple. Other reactions, thoughts, questions on this activity, or how to then do it in a classroom with a different audience.
I was wondering about the value of doing this before one does the apology, so as not to let the apology sort of constrain the way people are thinking. Because I know as we were thinking, you know, we know the apology, and it sort of like got in the way, I think, of how we were thinking about what our way of life is and what a charge might be, and I wonder if having students do that ahead of time, or at least part of this ahead of time, might give them an in to the reading of the apology instead of the other way. I mean, I can see argument for doing it both ways.
That's interesting. So actually, I'll be honest, my students that I did the exercise with yesterday hadn't read the apology, because it just wasn't in the way we were doing the class. But they quickly got the idea of putting a defense of the way of life, and it worked well. We had Jane and Flo visit, so I think I at least have experienced that this can work without having done that. But I don't have experience doing it the other way, so I don't have a firm view, but there could be advantages both ways.
But it seems like one advantage might be not so much that this exercise would be constrained if you'd already read the apology, but you might actually get a better reading of the apology from your students, because very often you're better at thinking through instruction on how to think something if you've already tried it yourself.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And that way they're starting not with an alien way of life, but with their own.
Yeah.
With your class, with your students, after they've done the exercise, what specific questions do you ask, or how do you have them do the reflection? What kind of wrapper do you use for this?
Yeah, so I did it somewhat open-ended. I asked them what sort of values came out about what they found good or bad in their way of life. And then we also reflected some on this aspect of metacognition. Is this a skill that you think you could now use in other areas to sort of go through this process of reflection, learn how to make a case against yourself when no one's forcing you to do it, and maybe it's easy to just do what you're doing, but can you take that further step now with some practice and with someone actually on the other side? Now can you do it on your own? Okay.
So we're going to have more questions at the end too, so this obviously will be part of the holistic reflection. But so now it's my turn again. Lightning rounds. All right, so this was one example of a way of life approach to teaching the apology. But we actually have a lot of examples. We're trying not to be too explicit at this point about what we mean by that, because we want that to kind of be part of the general discussion. So think about what you're seeing in the examples that we're giving, including the one that just happened, and then the 4 that you're about to see. Mine goes first, and mine is student apology. So this is a writing assignment that students do. I teach at Salt Lake Community College, and one of the things that is really important to me, or what motivates my classes, is I've got one shot with them. They're not majors, I don't have majors, so I have 16 weeks. And so I've always been thinking for the last several years, like, what can 16 weeks of philosophy do what can it contribute to a good life or to how they're going to approach their careers and other sorts of life experiences. So that's a important thing. So I decided that I would do these student apologies where they are thinking about this juicy question, what would you be accused of? Which is a super fun question. But there are, and it's a good way to like get them excited about trying to answer it. So what would they be accused of? But so I want to highlight a couple of issues that come up when I'm trying to do it. And one of them has to do with what is a good topic, and the other is what's a good structure. So one of the issues with picking a good topic for their student apology is, I mean, if you step back and think about what an apology is, a friend of mine and I were having this conversation about it, like, an apology is not just kind of a position paper or you make an argument about something that you think about an issue or whatever. It's actually like standing in front of people who would have you condemned and saying that this is the life I lived and this is the life that was worth it. And then so embedding that argument with a set of worldview and values and a way of understanding truth and knowledge. So incorporating like an ontology, epistemology, and an ethics all together. So picking a good topic then is really hard because students often feel like they don't have enough experiences, and they might not, where they can actually articulate a decision that they've made that has been counter to what someone they love has decided. So that's tough. And then also they might feel like they don't have anything that's like worth really talking about. And so they fall back on those issues, like should we build a wall? Should marijuana be legalized? You know, all those kinds of issue questions. And because they think the question or the disagreements like my mom thinks my boyfriend is stupid, or my friend and I got in an argument about sharing fries, or that sort of thing, like they don't think that that's really worth it. And so one of the things that is super important about the apology is that they are talking about like a way that they're living, not something that they think, but like something that is important enough that they've actually turned it into their lives or had it reflect in their practices on a day-to-day basis. So one of the ways that I do that, to get them to do that, is I have these series of scaffolding assignments. And by the way, all of these, we're going to show you a website at the end. All of the materials are available. But this is the accusations against me. It's a free write kind of activity where they're trying to articulate the actual disagreements they have and formulate them into a set of accusations, like worded in the way that you guys worded it. Like, be ye accused. And then, okay, so that's one. And I've got a couple of others, but I don't want to spend too much time talking about them, but they are on the site. And the other issue is what's a good structure. And so one of the things that's important about teaching an intro class at a community college is you're also teaching case making and argument construction, writing skills. And so I thought for a long time about how to create or find a structure that they could use to write their apology. So let's see, where am I? So what I found is that if you look at Socrates' apology, what you see after he like gets over the actual formal accusations with talk of flute playing and stuff like that, he like kind of tosses that aside. He's like, okay, now let me talk about what's really important. You may ask me why I am not ashamed. You may ask me if I can stop philosophizing. You may ask me why I won't beg, right? He poses these questions and then answers them, right? That same structure shows up in Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. So you may ask me why an outsider is here in Birmingham. You may ask me, you may call me an extremist. You may, and then a number of other things, right? And at each point, the writer says, but I say in response this, and it's embedded in a set of values. And so we've got another, in fact, I don't know how much you're going to talk about that, but we've got a essay, or it's actually a statement at sentencing by Tim DeChristopher. Do you know who Tim DeChristopher is? Environmental activist who got sent to jail because he faked bidding for oil and gas rights down in Southern Utah. He's a local, because I'm in Utah, and so it's like super cool to talk about him. But anyway, his statement at sentencing is an apology, like so much so that I actually got a little teary when I was reading it, because it was so beautifully said, and it had that same structure as I'm looking at it. It's like, you may say you need to punish me for blah, blah, blah. You may say, but I say, but I say, but I say. Now, that's a pretty typical point-counterpoint argument structure, right? So that's not mind-blowing. But what I think is helpful about it is that in the case of an apology, it is a point-counterpoint, but every point, the values and worldview come into the service of the defense. And so to get students to like think in those terms rather than just kind of factual counterpoints, but to get to do that self-reflective work. So we do a jigsaw workshop in my class as a an in-class workshop where they teach each other the structure that they're finding in a number of different model apologies. And then all of that is scaffolding for the actual assignment, which is write your own apology. And they've got a few other scaffolded things. So that's it for that. That was more than 5 minutes, but we're okay, we're totally good. Now, over there.
I'm Ryan of Elon University. I have been for a few years working on something that I call gastrosophia, and which is, gastro being stomach, sophia being wisdom, right? So it's a way of thinking about not philosophy of eating, but eating itself as a mode of philosophizing akin to dialoguing, reading Plato's Republic, stuff like that. But for my class, take that slide. On the class now, it's called Food, Identity, Power. And the way I've structured it is based on doing 4 types of eating apologies. First one's called a food apology, in which they articulate their identity, their meaning, their account of food, akin to maybe Socrates' his account of what goodness is. Second apology is a power, is actually identity apology. And the identity apology is when they read the work of a chef named Untitled Chapter. And so far as he discovers his own identity as a gay, black, Jewish man as he goes to the South, and looking at food in that articulation. Then the third apology is the power apology, in which we read the work of a Indian woman who talks about the way in which food and eating practices in India were shaped and articulated through colonization. But the culmination here is the eating apology, in which they're going to be in the middle of a dining hall on campus. And in front of them, they will have a plate. And it will be constructed very deliberately in order for them to articulate why they choose what they eat, the exact order they do it in, and then how their account of food, power, and identity are shaped in it. So, and like Socrates, it'll be in the middle. People can come up to them and challenge him, like in the Agora. And I will do this as well, because I'm articulating my own eating apology here.
And boom, lightning round. All right. So I'm going to be talking about philosophy walks. I have a lot to cover, so I just don't want to miss anything, so I'm going to just try and fly through this. First, I'll just sort of mention what a philosophy walk is, the value of doing philosophy outdoors, why the apology outdoors, what walking in nature can uniquely facilitate, and then hopefully also be able to run through a sample philosophy walk for the apology. So first off, a philosophy walk is exactly what it sounds like, walking in nature and philosophizing. I practice public philosophy, so most of the things I do are geared for the public sector, but I think with some creativity, you can certainly modify this for a campus sort of setting. They're definitely, you can alter them depending on audience, subject matter, goals, the environment, physical capabilities, all of that good stuff. I particularly really like to do stuff that embraces kind of the journey of philosophical investigation. And also they're structured to foster community and sharing of ideas and also testing them out together. There's a host of other things as well, but we can talk about that. So value of doing philosophy outdoors, I think thinking and walking go hand in hand. There's something really magical and powerful that happens when we're in nature that just elicits, I think, thinking deeply, sort of tilling the soil for inquiry and contemplation. Physical benefits, certainly everyone's pretty well versed on staying physically active, but I think even more so when you're in nature, there's more bang for your buck because you have the mental benefits as well. There's definitely a positive correlation with being outdoors and improved health, mental and, emotional and mental sort of well-being, as well as improved critical creative thinking skills. So that's already a bonus. And then to add to it, in addition, nature is certainly an awesome classroom and a teacher. We can learn a lot from it. Fertile ground for imagination and wonder. And I think, very importantly, there's something really humbling about being in nature. And I think this is important for philosophical investigation in general. And I've tried to think about why this is, because it's happened consistently in all of the philosophy walks we've done in the community. And one of the things that I think contributes to it is this idea that when we're outdoors, all sorts of walls fall away. I mean, literally, of course, you're outdoors, there's none. But more importantly, some social constructs fall away. These different ideas. I always say there's no CEOs on a trail. So everyone's sort of stripped down to their bare essentials, and it's a wonderfully vulnerable ground to start investigating ideas. So I think it makes it great. In terms of why doing the apology outdoors, like what can walking in nature do for us that's pretty unique for this? So one, kind of going back to this idea about journey, Socrates is all about following reason where reason guides. I think the journey of following reason where it guides and all of the questions that come up in the process are kind of naturally correspond with the experience of letting your feet sort of take you where they do on the trail. So I think allowing your feet and curiosity to sort of guide you sort of echoes, embodies, and maybe encourages the same sorts of things that happen when you're entertaining or asking questions. Second, phenomenology of just sort of being in nature, I think can really help us uncover new ways of understanding some of the things that are discussed in the apology. So if we were to look at, I'll sort of smash humility and irony together for this one. I do think there are times when we have the tendency as human beings to think we're sort of the end-all be-all of things, and I think nature can very quickly remind us that we're sort of one part of this much larger system. Or maybe we're the only arbiters of wisdom. Nature might be able to tell us otherwise. There's a lot of different ways in which we can find learning and knowledge and whatnot. Another one, and I think this one is particularly important for the apology. I think nature allows us to see that questioning is a place of connection and humility and not arrogance. So when people read the apology for the first time, and often many times after, they'll think that Socrates is kind of an a-hole, right? Like this whole, I'm ignorant, a ruse. Questioning, maybe doing with a smirk on his face, arrogant. But I think it's the exact opposite. I think his appeal to ignorance and questioning comes from a place of great humility and respect for the truth and clarity. And nature is a really cool way to do this, so to examine this. So think about when you're in nature, it invites all these sorts of questions, like, oh, there's a bird that's there, and how does this bird relate to that bird? Wow, this forest feels really sacred. Wait, are there other places that feel sacred? What does that even mean? Like when people ask questions like these, those are, we don't typically consider them to be asking from a place of arrogance or being combative. We just think they're being fueled by curiosity and wonder. So why not actually take that same rationale and apply that to a different domain? Asking questions about concepts, ideas, systems, just like Socrates did. Okay. So, all right. Oh, am I? So yeah, just this idea that nature can really remind us that questioning things can easily be a nod of respect for truth and clarity and humility, and not these other things. So sample walk. Okay. If we're going to stick with the irony theme, the way possibly you could structure it is you could have 4 stops. At each stop, there'll be reflection, discussion of a particular topic. In between, you'll have tasks that students or participants are asked to do. So an example would be kind of inspired from the first deal.
No idea where it's coming from.
Yeah. Inspired from the first one, you have 2 groups. One is charged with a particular deal, and the other one is needing to defend it using specifically the sort of Socratic irony, the methodology of Socratic irony. Then in between, you could ask students to actually discuss irony a little bit further, the different types of irony, how it actually differs from sarcasm and satire. Can you actually, is it possible for someone to be ignorant about something while also pointing out an absurdity? Then you get to another stop and you can maybe expand the view and have people look around them when you're outdoors and say, well, wait, are there other things that need apologies? Does nature need an apology? Then you task them with coming up with charges against nature, and then at the next stop, they decide which charges are worth sort of exploring, and then they're tasked with coming up with a defense against those for nature. And there's a variety of other things you can plug in there, but yes, sorry, I'm sorry, bam, lightning round. And finally, yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
Okay, so Ali and I have an activity to share with you all that we both used in teaching the apology. Of course, one important point in the apology is Socrates has this regular behavior. He goes around provoking people, refuting them, acting like a gadfly, and purportedly not just for kicks, but because he thinks that activity is beneficial in some way. So there's questions about exactly what the behavior looks like and whether it would in fact be beneficial for his interlocutors. Another important question regarding the apology is exactly why Socrates has been put on trial. Of course there are the official charges, but at several times he suspects that in fact those aren't the real reasons why he's being put on trial or is being convicted. There are these other reasons that have to do with people's responses to his habitual, provocative, refutation-based gadfly activity. So Ali and I designed this activity that we gave our students in part to have them reflecting on these questions, not by going back to the text, but by gaining some experiences outside of the classroom.
Yeah, so what we had them do, it was an outside of the classroom activity, and the point of it was for them to expose someone's ignorance about a matter of importance. And specifically, so like, we wanted them to be the gadfly. For my class, it was for a week. For your class, you had them dig into one particular conversation. And specifically what we had them do was get in a conversation with a friend, maybe a roommate, someone at a party, their parents over dinner, and try to find a topic that they took their interlocutors to seem like they knew, to feel like they knew a lot about. And then to ask a related, what is X question. So, for example, one of my students got in a conversation about whether the parking situation at my university is fair. And so his what is X question was, what is fairness? And the second step of the conversation after articulating a what is X question is to pursue that conversation in a Socratic way, basically until it blows up. So someone leaves out of anger or annoyance, or they just are sort of like, golly, I don't know. Or in the case of my students, I actually had a couple who they felt like they made progress, and they were like, this is a little embarrassing, but the results like, wow, yes, morality is totally relative. Or there is more to beauty than makeup. Or, but sometimes they like made progress in agreement. And then we wanted them to write a reflection on these experiences and bring those reflections to class. And Jacob's going to talk a little bit about some of the results of that and how we applied their observations to our classroom discussions.
Good. So I really had no idea what to expect when I gave my students the assignment of trying to expose ignorance in one of their peers. But one thing that was really exciting and I was delighted by is that their interlocutors responded to them exactly how Socrates' interlocutors are depicted as responding to him in the dialogues. So I'm passing around some findings from the gadfly exercise, or just a few, flip through it if you'd like. By far, they found that ignorance, even today, is in fact as widespread as Socrates found it to be in ancient Athens. So they report they were amazed that when questioning people about their views on, in particular, life and religion, people who have held these views for, in some cases, half their lives, it was impossible for them to successfully articulate their beliefs here and defend them. So they found ignorance was widespread. They also found, despite it being widespread, people were highly reluctant to admit that they were ignorant, just as Socrates finds. So my interlocutor resisted admitting his ignorance, didn't admit ignorance. Ignorance widespread, however, there's resistance to admitting ignorance, in part because they found people are just focused on winning the argument. Again, kind of exactly Socrates' experience as his interlocutors. The far majority of my students found their interlocutors became very annoyed when being asked to defend their views. Some of them reflected on why exactly an interlocutor would become annoyed when faced with these what is X questions. And here again, they report things very similar to what Plato depicts Socrates reporting in the dialogues. My interlocutor became annoyed because she was primarily focused just on seeming smart, or my thinking she was smart, not primarily on learning. And then they reflected on whether any good came out of this at all. Some students did think some good came out of it. Everyone left with more insight on the subject. Mein Schlegelin had a genuine kind of delight from having thought through her uncertainty. However, at least one of my students reported that serious bad came out of it. In particular, the interlocutors reporting that argument isn't a viable way of finding the truth in the first place. So I thought that was really cool. And again, as I said, in part because those reactions and those reflections on whether this refutation-based activity is beneficial or in fact harmful, we find depicted in Plato's corpus. And of course, instead of, one thing we could have done is just cite some relevant text for our students to say, hey, look, when you conduct this activity, people become annoyed and some of them just care about their reputation. But what was neat was that those lessons were learned not from going back to the text and reading it more carefully. Valuable activities, no doubt. It was learned rather from these students outside of the classroom having these experiences. Okay, so that's our point.
I'll just add, we had slightly different prompts for our different classrooms, and both of those are going to be on the website that Jane will tell you about at the end.
So, woohoo, lightning, yay. These are the 5 things that we kind of highlighted and walked our way through, so as a quick reminder of what they are. But just as a little transition now to kind of the more reflection, conversation mode, it's worth saying a little bit about who we are. We are a group of faculty, some of a group of 25 faculty that participated in the NEH Summer Institute on Reviving Philosophy as a Way of Life, run by Megan Sullivan, Stephen Grimm, and Stephen Engel out of Notre Dame, Fordham, and Wesleyan, respectively. And it was an amazing 2-week period where we're talking a lot about Pierre Hadot and a lot of the Confucianism and Buddhism we're going through. Yes, it was fun that you mentioned that. We're like, no, we've never heard of him. And anyway, Ryan's going to tell you a little bit of a story that's going to get us transitioning into this workshop mode, but that kind of is where how we all got to know each other and started working on things like this together. So there's some context. And Ryan, now do you want to take it over?
As we begin to conclude and hopefully open up the conversation with you and think about what a way of life approach is think about what does this language of philosophy as a way of life come from? Gregor said it comes from Pierre Hadot. Pierre Hadot is a French scholar who died in 2003. So big influence on Foucault's late career and starting this activity. But why way of life? And it turns out that his own account is, he didn't actually try to bring it back. It's not like he wanted to bring back the kind of experiential, existential way of life things that we're doing in this approach. For him, it was completely scholarly. And the reasoning is that he was reading Marcus Aurelius, he was reading Seneca, he was reading Epictetus, and he saw in his among French scholars, and if you know anything about French ancient scholars, is they're super rigorous. I've seen them actually at conferences, and they put all of it in Greek and in French. Whenever somebody quotes one thing, they're like, hold on, and they go to the Greek, and they're like, okay, that's fine. So they're super rigorous, and so what he saw was that kind of taste for rigor made a 2-tier approach or judgment on what constitutes good philosophy. So Plato and Aristotle, the kind of rigor argument, was good philosophy, rare philosophy. And then the Romans, Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius were kind of 2nd-tier philosophy, wasn't as rigorous. And he started to think I don't think so, but what's missing? And what he concluded was that there's an element in this kind of philosophy, this Roman Hellenistic philosophy, that doesn't survive. And what doesn't survive is the people. So philosophy then, as he concluded, was there's 2 dimensions. There's philosophy as the theory, which he calls philosophical discourse, which is what survives in the text. But what it is primarily about is the life. Philosophy was a way of life. Philosophy was a type of life that you could live in ancient Athens, Rome, or whatever. And of course, since they die, it doesn't survive. So when you're reading Marcus Aurelius, what's missing, or what you're actually seeing, is ways in which he spoke to himself so that he lived a better life. And so it's not that they're second tier, it's that what it's actually about was the way of life, and that was eventually lost because they died. And then the second thing is because they were split. So philosophy theory became one thing, and philosophy as a way of life became another thing. And the split, he sees it happening with the rise of Christianity. So Christianity took on the life, and the theory eventually became super monastic and turned into the university. So now you had a separate thing happening, the philosophical discourse, and the way of life, which is no longer tied to it. And of course, we wouldn't have seen that if we don't know it was originally there. Therefore, he concluded that philosophy as a way of life was actually the practice of philosophy before this split. And that's the theoretical reasoning for it.
Nice recap. So, yeah, at this point, we want to just kind of open the floor to people to think about, you know, were you about to say something? I'm sorry.
Oh, I think, why don't we all go up here?
Yeah.
So we're in one place. Yeah.
So now it feels super awkward, all standing up here. It was like, but, yeah, but yeah, so what would be great now is to have a conversation together about like some of the ways that we bring these kind of elements. I mean, we're in the teaching hub of the AAPT, so we think about like the meaning and the practical value, and not just the practical value, in my view, not just the practical value for like skills of writing and critical thinking and stuff, but like the practical tools to help you live an examined life, one of value and meaning for yourself. So, so maybe how we do that. Are there things that you see in your own practices that kind of echo a way of life approach, or some of the things that you've seen today that are meaningful, and maybe can you identify what a way of life approach or description might be based on some of the stuff we've said? And I guess I'll leave it there to see thoughts.
I just have a quick question, just a curiosity. Do you guys try to take this way of life approach with everything that you're teaching, or if you're doing this with the apology in an intro class, then do you also try to do this with every other text in that class, or does it become more like the apology is our way of life angle, and then with other texts we're doing something different?
I do. As much as possible is what I've been doing lately. So not only with ancient philosophy, but with any philosophy course I've been teaching. So I'll just give you some examples. I think some questions we're all interested in is exactly what it means to conceive of philosophy as a way of life. It's one question. There's a further question: what does it mean to teach philosophy as a way of life? So perhaps it'd be useful for us to think about those questions at some point. But on the kind of what does it mean to teach philosophy as a way of life question, I've been conceiving of that as teaching philosophy by means of prompting students to have certain experiences that either acquaint them with information they couldn't get otherwise, or acquaint them with information they could get otherwise, but in some very effective way. So I've been doing this, so in an ancient philosophy class, but now with the apology, when teaching Plato's Laches, which when I teach ancient philosophy is the very first Socratic dialogue we read, at the very beginning of class I have them write down a definition of courage. So courage is, and they write down the definition. In class we learn what Socrates requires for a successful definition, and then at the end of class they become Socrates and try to refute the definitions of their peers in a kind of like last person standing competition. So they get a little bit of experience about what it's like to act in the way Socrates acts, but also the experience of Socrates' interlocutors to defend kind of one's initial take on defining some central evaluated term. I taught business ethics recently, and I teach a unit on emotional labor, and so one activity I've given my students to prompt them, also have a sort of experience that gives them valuable information, is to, for the length of a day, monitor the emotional labor they consume from some service worker, and like every time they jot it down, and then reflect on whether that emotional labor is being adequately compensated. You know, so I'm teaching a philosophy as a way of life course right now, and we're going through the sort of, there are certain kind of schools in the history of philosophy where philosophy is presented as a way of life more than elsewhere. So at this Ancient Institute that was mentioned, we started with Confucianism, Buddhism, Stoicism, Epicureanism, skepticism, we had Kantianism, and existentialism. And my course is largely doing things like that. And what happens at the end of every class is we brainstorm together exercises we can do outside of class that will cause us to gain new insights into the material we analyzed in class. So we just did Epicureanism, and so one activity is for us to prioritize gaining static pleasure, the complete absence of all psychological and physical pain, for the length of one day, to really live a day trying to achieve that, and then identify obstacles that get in this way. So lots of other examples. Yeah, I've been trying to kind of do this as much as I can.
Yeah, and some of what's cool is that there, in the history of philosophy, there are a ton of actual classic philosophical exercises, especially in Stoicism and other places, right? But it's super amazing to have the students kind of create philosophical exercises that they take with them also, right? And that's what you're describing too.
I'll add one thing is that if Cohoe is right, and that philosophy is a way of life, then all the dimensions of that life are modes of doing philosophy. Hence eating, something we all do, hopefully, usually multiple times a day, are opportunities for doing philosophy. But what that looks like is really difficult. And in my one class, actually, we choreograph a philosophical meal, which we invite the dean in, and we actually blindfold them, and then block their ears, and let them things they don't know about. So, but that includes everything. So one thing that I try to do often is think about, well, what about this thing? Can this be a way of doing philosophy? And so we had, for Rebecca. Rebecca was teaching us for a bit at Eli, and it was super fun. And we were doing this with the Philosophy Club, which is of course called the Philosophy Mamas. We had a person take us through a series of dance exercises to see if we can do dance as philosophy. So bodily movement as philosophy. And like Marissa, I do a lot of walking in my class. So can you walk as one way of doing philosophy? So exploring more and more modalities for doing philosophy.
Let me just say, I think there is a scholarly question here about whether you, like Cohoe, all philosophy should be subsumed under philosophy as a way of life, or whether something like Stoic view where you're doing logic for the sake of ethics, or if there's this Aristotelian view that there is this life of understanding that isn't quite an ethical activity itself, but is the goal. So there's a question about whether logic and metaphysics, do you have to apply them, or is that itself living philosophy just by using your reason? So questions about how you think about it then affect how you would teach and incorporate it in areas.
So I like the idea of having a full course on this, just because I imagine it's the sort of thing like you really got to take some time and do these sorts of things over and over again. And I know a couple of you mentioned you were able to have a full class on it, and that seems like at my institution that might be a hard sell. So I wonder if you had any experiences of justifying a full class.
Yeah, so can I do hair? At my university, our intro classes, the content of the course isn't really set. We have certain learning objectives that I could teach a lot of different material to. So I subtitled my intro course, and the syllabus is online, something like How to Get Better at Life. And we have, I broke it down to be about 1 unit a week, so we're going pretty quickly. And for each unit, we're not just doing ways of life that sort of are obviously philosophy as ways of life. Like we have a Stoicism unit, an Epicurean unit. But we also have, we did like a sort of free speechy, read John Mill kind of unit. And for each one of these weeks, they have what I've called a deliverable that's due at the end of the week. And I called it a deliverable because it's not always a writing assignment. Like when they were reading Seneca on the Shortness of Life, they had to do a time mapping exercise about how they're spending their time and how it relates to like goals they actually have. And then they did do like 200-word reflection on that kind of thing. So what I've tried to do is incorporate some of this, some of the schools of thought into a more general intro class, and also some of the pedagogical approaches to like what am I trying to get them to get out of the assignments. I don't really just want written reflections. I want them to live something and then give me some deliverable about it so I can like grade it. So that's how I've made it work at my institution.
Yeah, I could jump on that too. So in my class, because that one-shot thing, like at midway through the semester, I have like this quiet desperation. Like, they're gonna forget this in a couple of months. They're gonna, what can I do to get them to carry this with them as long as I can? And so one of the things so a big part of it is like, a big part of the way of life approach is to break this down into like lots of workshops and lots of living experiences. But one thing that I did in that regard is I created what was called a mini Enchiridion assignment, where they take all of these different ways of approaching the ways of life that they've been seeing throughout the semester, and they create a mini handbook that's the size that could be laminated that they can put in their backpack. And so they come up with phrases that are like mini aphorisms for what they've learned. So like Plato's concern about the keen eye of the clever rogue, right, in the allegory, that they turned into don't half-ass your life. Like just fun little aphorisms like that they then create into this thing. And so like that's, it's small and it might be pointless, but it might work, and it is like from this place of a little desperation. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off. No, you guys are the...
Well, just two thoughts. So of course, like this, at least if you teach in a certain way, it covers a lot of the history of philosophy. So maybe you could sell it like that, not just one little bit. And then the course is really popular. So it brings a lot of people in for reasons you can imagine.
And I feel like getting it up the second time shouldn't be that hard. The first time.
And I would say, I think it's important for this whole movement that we're involved in is not just to teach special courses with the philosophy as a way of life in our title, but to work this approach into teaching intro courses, into teaching the history of ancient philosophy, modern philosophy, Confucian philosophy, and so on. And I think we saw in our approaches both ways in which it can be used for just understanding the text better, as Jacob and Alan were talking about, living like a gadfly, you can appreciate why Socrates got the reactions he did and understand that better. But then also, so I think these exercises can help with understanding, and then they can also help with application. Like Jane's apology, where the students are trying to defend and articulate their own life, not to better understand a text, but to better understand their values and what's important to them. And some can be a mix of that, like I think the exercise we were doing at the beginning. It's partly to better understand what a defense and defending a way of life looks like, but also to think through what, in my case, how would I defend my values and goals in life?
Thanks, you guys. This was awesome and fun, both all at the same time. I have a request and then a comment. The request is, would you please videotape yourself giving that talk about way of life and theory and stuff and post it on YouTube? I'm serious. Yeah.
I don't know.
That would be okay.
Looks like a video.
Was somebody actually?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so please post that on YouTube with something that's easy.
Yeah. So let me say something quickly on that. So there's a continuing effort. Notre Dame and the Mellon Foundation have money for the Mellon Philosophy as a Way of Life project. We're going to have and I'm involved on the advisory board that. There's going to be a website, philife.nd.edu, that should be going up at the end of March, and the plan is to have this video, portions of it up there, and a bunch more resources.
Okay. Yay, I get one more. Okay. The second thing is that I love all of these exercises, although I have to say that the gadfly thing, when I teach the apology, I actually print on the assignment, don't try this at home. But I wanted to push back just a little bit on that, because I like it. I already do this. This is cool. And though I call it different things, but when I teach argumentation, I very clearly try to get it out of the argument as combat paradigm and metaphor, and put it into a sort of a self-reflective mode that argumentation is a self-discipline. You know, we should gadfly ourselves, basically. And because, in part because, Socrates is just wrong, right? I mean, being an expert doesn't mean that you can articulate everything that you know. And knowing stuff and being able to use it and apply it is different. It's a different skill than being able to articulate what you're doing in a line. And part of the skill of philosophy is learning how to articulate what you think and why you think it. And that's hard. It takes a lot of practice. It's not always good at it. And so for me, teaching the discipline of philosophy and the discipline of argumentation is, as I, for the slogan that I stole is, it's not about being brilliant, it's about becoming progressively less stupid. And being able to communicate effectively to other people what actually we believe and why, and help them, and then help them, right, articulate. Not make them feel stupid, right, for not being able to articulate the things that they know very well, but to help them out in articulating those in a form that makes it clear to us what they think and why. So anyway, that's my pushback.
Yeah, can I jump in?
I just want to say real quick, I do not condone every activity that I assign. Like every way of life.
I used to be
have
chair of our
participated.
subjects committee, and so that just like, I went,
I mean, importantly, the goal of the activity wasn't show someone they're stupid.
Right.
Right? It was
right.
ask kind of what do you mean questions.
Right.
Until a person can no longer respond.
Right.
And see how it goes. And this wasn't kind of held up as the model of doing philosophy. It was just kind of for the sake of, Socrates is convinced that so many people think they know what they don't. And we might be like, oh yeah, those ancient Athenians. But in fact, thought it's actually widespread today, and it's important to realize. So we just meant to kind of teach that by its experience.
No, don't get me wrong. I'm going to actually have them do it.
I think that what you said would actually be a great thing to say in class. So you don't, you can build on what they did in a way that, takes it in a different direction or points out some of its limitations or failures.
Yeah, I might have them do the back-to-back, just do sort of the initial gadfly thing to see what happens when you do this, and then try to have them turn it into, figure out instructions and turn it into a constructive conversation.
And in my class anyway, we have lots of these. Like I said, we have a different deliverable every week. And so sometimes they kind of fit together as different models for engaging in disagreements or in working on philosophical problems. And some of them I think actually show that collaboration is really beneficial. So I think you can pair it with a lot of different activities or perspectives and to highlight what it is that you want them to take away.
Yeah, I think the fact that this was on the apology, if we'd be doing Stoic inner meditations and reflection, it would look a little different.
What was I going to say? It was great.
It was really good.
Yeah. No, but when you were talking, I just was thinking about that idea of valuing not just that conversation or understanding between people, but that internal conversation. And so at one point I was talking about how the students don't feel like they have anything worth saying that's about their own self-reflection or their own decision-making. And I gave you the examples of those trite things, my mom thinks my boyfriend is stupid, and they're fighting over fries and things like that. Well, those are actually examples that they wrote apologies on. They ended up choosing those, and they were poignant and beautiful. So the one about the boyfriend, it sounds like it's just going to be teen angst kind of stuff. But in it, in one of the but I say sections, she talks about how she and her mother responded to the loss of her father in different ways, and she wants to approach it. I was she never I don't know if she would have at what point, but this gave her an occasion to really like value a reflection on the relationship between her parents. And by the way, the Fry one was very similar. It was in the end, an argument for the responsibilities of friendship. And sodas that are free refills must be shared, and fries that do not have free refills do not get shared. Anyway, you had your hand up?
Oh, no.
So one thing that I've been reflecting on as I hear you all speak is something that I've been thinking about with some colleagues at other institutions in an ancient philosophy and collaboration projects. And that is about the ethical implications or questions about trying to change our students and not just teach them. On the one hand, it seems obvious to me that I want to change my students, not into something in particular, but from beyond where they are. And generally speaking, I think we saw a lot of buy-in to that, but then had someone in a religion department who was very concerned about that approach and what might be involved in expecting and asking students to become otherwise. So I wondered if you thought about and reflected on that.
Yeah, I think that was one of, we spent a good time in the summer seminar thinking about that. And I think sometimes the people who started this are just really enthusiastic about sharing whichever way of life they're into. But I think thinking of the religious comparison is important because I think there's a lot more thought about, obviously the dangers of proselytizing and the limits. And I think one thing that maybe Cohoe can be misleading on is the picture there's this one philosophical way of life, when in fact, it really matters whether you're an Epicurean or a Stoic for which kind of exercises you're going to do. Are you getting rid of your emotions? How are you relating to food? The Epicureans relate to food very differently. So I think that's one way to do it. You could just have some of these be extra credit as opposed to assigned, or you can address it through diversity, we're going to do exercises that give you a little taste of what following this way of life would be, but if it's not, the whole class isn't on being a Stoic and you have to come out a Stoic on the end. It is really looking at, objections to Stoicism as well, but I think that's something we have to be aware of.
I do think also that if teaching already is transformative, but like if you can pretend it's not, that's a lie, right? So it's taking seriously the fact that it already is that. Even if it's just spending 3 months with you or whatever, it's already changing them. So it's taking account of what already is undergoing in a way in which it was metacognitive, like in a way that you're now explicit about it. So in a certain way, like pretending you're not is the wrong thing to do, right? And so it doesn't mean you're done with it. It means now we're having the conversation. And now we can think about the problems with it. And religious studies people would say that's when you have the conversation.
Just one thing. So it's really important to me in this philosophy as a way of life course I'm teaching to philosophy majors in their last year that at the end of the class we negotiate which exercises we're going to do. So I don't come in saying, and now we're all going to do this. It's a 3-hour class, so we at that point will have analyzed the relevant material for 2.5 hours or something. We spend the last 30 minutes thinking about what we can now do to give us better insights on this. And so it's truly a negotiation. They propose things, I propose things, we reject things, and then we decide. And then at the start of the next class, we begin with about 30 minutes, discussing how it went. So I think the concern is very real. That's in part how I address it.
I have a Cohoe-related question. So I'm loving this. Thank you for this. I quite enjoyed it. And I do want this to be a practical question, but what I'm thinking is something that John Cooper in his book, Pursuits of Wisdom. It's a book-length response to Cohoe. And I guess many of you know this book. Okay, so you probably...
That was the seminar where he was working on it.
To kind of catch up, there's sort of a two-sided, as I understand it, criticism that he makes of this approach, especially this idea of spiritual exercises. One of them specific to the apology is that he thinks that it causes us to misread the apology. And on the positive side, or you want to put it this way, is some excellent philosophy doesn't transform you, to use the language that is. And so my question is, where do you in the class bring in the focus on argument in sorting these student responses? Because presumably that's the answer. It's it's ultimately logic and reason. I wasn't hearing in the way you actually presented it where that happened. Maybe that's the way you could say how you introduce the idea of logic and argument and some of these exercises. Like, is makeup really a good place to start when thinking about beauty? Or to get that one student answer. Is there a way in that class that shows up?
I see them as very compatible. So in really every course I teach basic conditional logic, the ability to extract an argument from a text in terms of inclusion form, and evaluate it for validity and soundness. And I do that at that's like first day material, and especially it continues on in the first couple of weeks. And in class, we're definitely analyzing arguments. We take them very seriously. There's these extra components that go along with it. So yeah, so that's just one quick thought.
Yeah, and the other thing is that with the prioritization of a way of life, all of the life, it's extracting out of those argumentative structures rather than starting with the bare bones form. So they're going through the experience of something, and then it's saying, look, I can pull this out of there, and then once they've already been through it, they can then begin to have some buy-in, right? So like, you can give me some conditional statements, whatever, like I don't care what the conditional is, but like if I'm actually going through experience, I start thinking this and this and this and this, and so that's what that's called. So it's always based in the experiential mode, right?
Ryan, give the example of the disgust thing from your class.
Okay.
Great example of that.
So in this one class, we had a day on disgust. And so what we did is, this is being taped. I had them bring in the things that they thought were disgusting. So some people brought in rotten orange, which is why we're not reading orange. Some people brought in money, like money. And then one person team, they brought in chocolate chip cookies, and then the ingredients for chocolate chip cookies. And the point was like, at what point does the deliciousness become disgusting? At what point does the disgusting become delicious? And it turns out very rarely, actually, I don't know if you've ever eaten, so what we did is took a big spoon and they put all the ingredients of cookies, but they're not cooked together, and then we ate them, and it's horrible. Like, eating flour, there's only one person threw up, so that's, something. So, yeah, so, this is the taping part. But
reporting you to your
I was actually fun. So one of the things my university is really great is that they've never said no to something. And I'm like, this, yes. So, and that's where my institutional privilege there, right? So that's one question I always want to come where. What we had done in this class, which is by the way interesting class because it was actually had a kitchen in it. So on one side was the kitchen, like a full kitchen, like two refrigerators, 2 stoves. The other side was a seminar room. So we went to the kitchen and we made ourselves disgusting. Like we brought out the experience of being disgusted. And they said, okay, now like, what is that? What's that disgust? And as we walked back over and we started to draw up this whole thing on the board, we extracted the logic of disgust out of actually being disgusted.
And that was the entry point into the bigger, more text-based, more argument-centered kind of understanding of something. It started in affect.
Right.
Yeah.
But don't cheat them of the experience. Like, start with the experience and then draw it from there.
And I think you also have to think about how their reason and other parts of our life and our embodied experience are related. I think the weakness of John's book is that he's focusing on this idea, okay, what does the Stoic sage look like and what role does reason play in their life? Whereas we can read Socrates and be convinced that I should value my virtue more than wealth and status. But I can be convinced by that argument and then go off and worry about how what my students think of me or whether I can get a grant or something. So then some of these exercises come in as ways to support work you're already doing argumentatively, but they can be blocked in various ways by emotions, by images, and so I think part of the project is about the relationship and engagement between different parts of ourselves, different desires, and how reason relates to them. So, but it depends on which view is right as to how much of a role these things should play.
We have about 5 minutes left.
There was another.
Oh, I was just gonna, so I'm also trying, like, always think of an experience or a way to enact whatever, text we're doing. And it's not that hard when you're doing, ethics or whatever to have, students do things, and a lot of like ancient Greek philosophers also. So I'm wondering, like, do any of you have an example of something that was like the hardest thing to think of a way to have an like the kind of text, I don't know, maybe like a philosophy of mind, or maybe that's not even hard either, or some sort of, like, what's like the most esoteric thing that you've taught that you've figured out a way to make into an enactive experience? Like the thing you're most proud of that you came up with a way to do it.
Aristotle's metaphysics.
Okay.
So
Go on.
Although this wasn't my idea, this was Tushar Arani's idea. Do you remember when we did that area mazes thing? So I'm teaching an upper level analytic metaphysics class, and it's like kind of set what we're going to talk about, more or less. And an opening activity that I did during our first week was based on what one of our leaders at the NEH Summer Seminar had us work through. The class worked through these area mazes, which, does anyone know what those are? They're so fun. Google them. But the activity is, it like uses your brain kind of like a Sudoku puzzle. So it's like that kind of like logic-y puzzle type of thing. And they were really difficult. At first, the first one was kind of easy, and the next 4 that I gave them got increasingly pretty difficult. They like basically had to do algebra in their heads. They weren't allowed to write it out. And they had to work through it on their own, and then they had to pair up and work through it in groups. And I had them reflect on like what this experience was like, and for many people it was very discouraging. I almost cried when we did it at the thing, because I was like, oh my gosh, this like person next to me is like da 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 all the time. And I'm like 27 minus 7 is, and I like can't, it's kind of overwhelming. And then so they had to work through it with their partners. Anyway, so we reflected then together on what the experience was like and what it was like when they turned to their partners. And what I wanted them to take away, which is what they took away from this exercise, was that they were very curious. Like, though some of them were self-conscious, when they turned to their partners, they really just wanted to know the answer. They're like, how did you get it? Explain it to me. And the people who understood it really clearly, who maybe had like an intuition or a knack for it, were then forced to articulate why they saw it in a way that the people who didn't see it right away were able to see it. And then we talked about how one thing that was, one of the takeaways is that there was an answer. Like, all of these things had an answer. You just had to like apply certain sort of rules of logic carefully enough and slowly enough and consistently enough, and you would get the answer. And we discussed this in connection to Plato's, the inscription that's supposedly above whatever the entrance. So if you don't get geometry, you can't come in, or whatever. And like, why would Plato have said that? Why would he think you have to study geometry before you study philosophy? Because you need to be careful, you need to understand logic. There are rules, there is a goal, like you can get there. And we might need to work together, and it works better if you collaborate than if you're like constantly at each other's throats. And the practice of geometry sort of puts you in the right frame of mind and gives you the tools to do that. And I thought that was a really great way to open this contemporary analytic metaphysics seminar. And I think I have a good group of students. I think they have really nice characters for the classroom, but also they've been very collaborative, and they've been very like, let's try to figure this out. And I really think that opening exercise set a tone for, we can do this, we just gotta apply the rules, and we're gonna work together on it. But you were
what's the Aristotle's metaphysics thing?
All right, so this actually appears on Adriel's blog, right? So if you want to remember this is there, and also her blog is great. And she's actually doing a version of this. With medieval rather than Aristotle's metaphysics. But I basically turn all of Aristotle's metaphysics into a 5-act Shakespearean play. So the first act of exposition is we read book 1, going through all the accounts of being and pre-Socratics and like that. But I turn each one of them into a daily experiential exercise. For example, when he said Parmenides, and he said Thales, they read Thales, and then in the classroom, we actually, for one class we went into a pool. So and we're sitting there
everyone should take Ryan's class.
and so smooth it away. So we're sitting there, and so we're like water, right? But we're like, what is it? But we're in it, right? We're like, how is this the answer? answer. And so we're all sitting like, we must look crazy, right? Like, 20 people are like, being, or like, so that's one. But they read Parmenides, so they say Parmenides, we go read Parmenides, and then we sat as still as possible and only spoke in nouns and adjectives. Like why is being static? And we couldn't actually ask that, like, being. Static. Stasis. And so, and of course the next day was Heraclitus, where we actually never stopped moving. And we only spoke in verbs and adverbs. Right? And then with the atomists, they actually brought stuff in, and we cut up, we divided it. And of course, we couldn't divide it to nothing, so atoms, right? So that's Act 1. And then I go through Act 2, the rise in action, the climax, which is paradoxes, fall in action, like that. So you just say, like, try to turn every single kind of thing into an experimental exercises. Right? That's all happening while they're writing their own metaphysics. And that's something that Angel's doing with Angel's too. So they're like, what is the account of being? We're like, well, what is it? And then they do it. And there's a scaffold assignment which they attempt to articulate their account of being. And of course they can't do it, right? But that process goes through it.
Would you? Oh, okay. Well, that actually takes us to noon, and I heard the room might be.
I think that's not, so we're good. We can take our time leaving.
We can take our time leaving.
Yeah.
Okay, take our time leaving. Before we take our time leaving, though, let's thank Oh, yes, I totally forgot. This is our website. If you QR code that, you'll get to it. And then we also have, you can take the QR code with you. There's 16 copies of this if you want to.
And there's another teaching obsession at 1 on argument mapping. So there's a little break and then more apologies.